Adults and children have the opportunity to play almost any sport they could think of, or even just have a nice place to go for a walk. Two of Fitchburg's first professional athletes were ball players. Nixie Callahan was born in 1874 and Pat Morin 2 years later. Both worked in the mills when they were young teenagers, and both got their start playing semi-pro ball locally, Callahan on the Pepperell team and Morin on the Fitchburg team. Morin died when he was 48 after an illustrious career as a player and manager. A special event was held in Fitchburg to honor the hometown boy, and a monument was commissioned that now stands in West Fitchburg near the British American Club. Both men were returned after their deaths and now rest in nearby plots at St. Bernard's Cemetery. Skating has occupied an important niche in Fitchburg history for almost the last 100 years. Carmelita Landry skated as a girl at the St. Joseph's skating rink and at Mirror Lake. She went on to become the North American speed skating champ. Sadly, she did not become the first Olympian from Fitchburg. The 1944 Olympics were canceled because of World War II. Hockey has long been a popular sport in Fitchburg. The Wallace Civic Center has a rink named after Carmelita Landry and hosted Bruins practices for several years. Our latest Olympian, Erica Lawler, was surely inspired by the hockey culture in town and in her family. Her Aunt Kathy was a hockey player, even before there were women's teams. Kathy still holds collegiate records. Fitchburg's first Olympian, Erkki Kutunen, immigrated from Finland as a child. He became the city's first Olympic competitor in 1948. He competed in track and field. He went on to be the athletic director at Fitchburg High School. Cycling was not an important sport in the 1950s. Ivor and Johnson once made bicycles in Fitchburg, used by famous pros, but the glory days were long over. In the very beginning of the 20th century, a well-paid cyclist made 4 times as much as the best-paid baseball player. Art Longström was our next Olympian. He went to both the Summer and Winter Games in 1956, the first American to compete in both games in 1 year. He trained and competed first as a speed skater, following in the steps of Carmelita Landry at Mirror Lake. He began cycling so he could train in the warmer months. Longström's wife Terry and their family friend Dick Ring explained how Longström used to train during this 2005 interview.
He and I had skated together from the time we were 14, 15 years of age.
Really?
And as Terry had mentioned, then we get clued in by the older competitors. If you had any desires to make an Olympic team or skate or in international competition, you had to do something in the summer. You're going to get yourself cardiovascularly fit. And you take a bicycle, your body weight is perched on a saddle. Where is it perched? On rollerblades. Your quads are taking all the punishment, and these are what are getting strong. As a result, when you get back on the bike and you get in a hilly stage race, you're going to do well. You're prepared for it. You had to be in shape in order to compete the way we did. We'd roll from the skating season right into the bike season.
After he competed in the 1956 games, Longström continued to race. He died at age 23.
Coming home from winning the Quebec-Montreal race, and apparently a bee got in the car. The road was a little slippery, and you know, trying to get the bee out of the car, the gentleman that was driving tried to hold the car on the road, and it just went and hit a tree, and Art was sleeping, and it hit him right in the back of it. And we got up there before he passed away, but it was just one of those things.
A monument on the Upper Common commemorates his achievements. The monument is not the only memory of Longström. Since 1960, 2 years after his death, Fitchburg has hosted an international bike race in his name.
There were 3 speed skaters and 3 Olympic cyclists as his pallbearers, and Terry, Art's wife at the time, they'd been married, I guess, about 1.5 years or so. They didn't want a park, they didn't want a bridge named after him or something like that, so they got together with the local paper and decided, well, let's try to put this bike race together.
We decided that maybe a living memorial would be the thing that would live on and on and on.
Former Mayor George Burke, who passed away in 2011, was one of the founders of the race. Community involvement made this race a reality.
We got to have something to draw the people together. Art Longo, the father, he said, you know, he says, they got bicycle racing. There's nothing here. But he says, that would be good. And I said, bike racing? That sounds good to me even, you know. Art is the one that said that. He said, this will be one of the biggest things for Fitchburg, you know. If we have it here, he says, that'll build unbelievable. So I talked to the committee. They said, that's a lot of work. I said, no, it's no work. When it gels, it becomes pleasure, you know.
It was won that year by a Canadian, Guy Morin.
And Art's longtime friend, Guy Morin, was the one that won the first.
Oh,
and
really?
this is Guy get on the starting line with a focus in his eyes. There wasn't anybody in that field that was going to beat him on that day. And he was serious.
Yeah.
And he did. He won. And I talked to him after the race, and he said, he had tears in his eyes. He said, this one was for Art.
The feeling of community is still felt by racers, whether they are from Fitchburg or far away. Frances Morrison grew up on the corner of Arlington and School Street.
I got started in bike racing actually from the Fitchburg Longstreet Classic. My mom would always take me to watch it when I was little, and I was kind of like, oh, bicycles, this is interesting. And then when I forget if I was 11 or 12, and I went to see the race, and I saw a bunch of the women race, and I got pretty excited about it. And the next year, we had a team of pro women stay at our house. We hosted some racers, and I was really, really inspired by them. And I begged my mom to get me a road bike, and this is when I was either 12 or 13. And she made me ride up and down the steepest hill in our neighborhood every single day for like 2 weeks to prove that I would actually be committed to it.
Rebecca Wellens, a professional cyclist, has come back to ride in the Longshow year after year.
The culture of the race is just wonderful. I love the crit, the downtown Fitchburg crit. Everybody's out there screaming. The community's behind it. It's really exciting. That to me is one of the most exciting races in New England. Absolutely. I've come back for more every year at the Longshow. I love that it's run by volunteers. I mean, that's amazing to me. All the work and the community support that goes behind it is fabulous. Really makes the race. Absolutely. It's very special every year.
We're the second oldest continuously run bike race in America. We generally get between 750 and 800 riders. We get riders from 36 states, 9 countries, 5 Canadian provinces. We get riders from every state east of the Mississippi. We've got really an amazing history of riders who have been with us starting as juniors, and then we follow them up to the professional ranks, and then they head over to Europe. We've had Greg LeMond here race as a junior. Lance Armstrong raced and won here in 1992. In fact, any American rider that's found success in Europe has come through here. The race doesn't belong to a company, it doesn't belong to it really is, it's one of the last larger club managed races in America, and that's the Fitchburg Cycling Club. So it belongs to the community.
One of the first sports held in Fitchburg was harness racing. People would race their horse and buggy at an oval at the Worcester North Agricultural Fairgrounds on Summer Street, near the Lunenburg line. Later, the races were held at what is now Coolidge Park. Ron Bouchard raced. Not horses, though. He was a NASCAR driver who won the Talladega 500 in a 1981 photo finish.
We'd like to show you the exciting finish. Here's a call you heard from our Kim Squire. The white flag is in the hand of Harold Kinder. He's about to indicate 1 lap to go. Went Waltrip, then he came high around a lap car going to turn number 1. It is Waltrip for the advantage by 1, 2 car lengths. Waltrip seems to draw away in turn number 1 on the 33-degree banking at the west end of the track for the last time. Down they go into the back straightaway. Last time down that 3,000-foot chute. Labonte goes right back up on the rear bumper. Moving down the inside comes the photo finish. Ron Bouchard struck to the inside. He may have won it by a foot. How about it, Donnie? Well, I couldn't really tell at any point who won the race, but if he won, it was by barely a foot. And it's a typical Talladega race. It was really something. I was out of breath myself the last time, and I'm up here. 3 cars came out of the tri-oval. They lined up like a squadron of B-51s a la World War II, and down they came to the line. And Ron Bouchard has unofficially won this race. We'll have a look at the photo finish right now. Here they are, 3 cars charging to the line. Waltrip is in the middle. Labonte had made the move on the outside. Ah, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. At 195 plus. Give it to Ron Bouchard of Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Race Hill Farms with the biggest win of their entire racing history.
Bouchard now owns several car dealerships and just opened 2 new stores in Lancaster. At one time, Fitchburg was home to semi-professional teams. Some played at the sports arena on the corner of Cleghorn and Kimball Street. With an ice rink, gymnasiums, bowling alleys, and a place for players and fans alike to wet their whistles, the place was popular in the 1940s when it opened. It was sold to be used as industrial space and later torn down. Crocker Field opened in 1918 as a baseball field. It was funded by the Crocker family. Crocker Field is no longer the baseball arena where, it is rumored, in 1920, slugger Babe Ruth asked what professional team played there. The oddly shaped football field hosts Fitchburg High football games. Once a year, students from throughout the school system gather for a relay race. Echoes of the graciousness planned by the Olmsted firm remain. The Olmsteds designed many urban oases, including Central Park in New York and the Emerald Parks in Boston. Community sports is popular in Fitchburg. School teams attempt to follow in the footsteps of the 1926 Fitchburg High basketball team, who won the national championship. The Recreation Department coordinates games for adults and children, often on the fields at Coolidge Park. This summer, 2011, the pools will be open for swimmers once again. Skaters are mainly limited to indoor ice, unlike the days when Landry skated, and there were outdoor rinks across the city. Sima Park still has a skating rink, though, along with groomed cross-country ski trails. A plaque behind the softball field at Coolidge reveals a little-known fact about Fitchburg. Thanks to a group of guys raising money for brain-injured children, Fitchburg was briefly in the Guinness Book of World Records for holding the longest softball game in 1981. Welcome to Fitchburg History. This is our 6th episode. We're talking about sports tonight. And tonight we have Mark Bedanza from Leominster, who is the author of 2 books about football. 1933, Football at the Depth of the Great Depression, published in 2010, and A Game That Forged Rivals, How Competition Between 2 New England high schools created one of the greatest traditions in football, published in 2009. We'll be talking about football in Fitchburg over the past century. As always, viewers are welcome to call with questions and comments. You can call the station at 978-343-0834, or even send us an email at fitchburghistory@gmail.com. Thank you for being here tonight, Mark.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I really want to learn about football. That's one thing that didn't get covered with all this research I've been doing, because I said, why do it? You already have.
Hopefully I can be helpful.
I'm sure you will be. Maybe we can start to put it a little bit more in the time frame of when other things were happening. By the time the first Thanksgiving game was played, Fitchburg already had semi-pro teams in other sports in the area. How did football become the iconic game?
Football is really an American game because, as many people know, it sort of was developed from English sports, rugby and soccer. First intercollegiately, soccer was played from 1869 through around 1875, and then the American colleges started to play rugby. Over the years, especially in the 1880s, through the help of Walter Camp largely, the rugby game was changed into what became a form of American football, or early American football. And that became a very uniquely American sport at a time when Americans were sort of looking for that sort of thing, looking to develop a place where young men could show their courage, test their mettle. It was a very rough sport, uniquely violent amongst team sports back in those days, and there was a lot of controversy about that.
Yeah, because one thing I wanted to talk about is how the game has changed over the last century. I know equipment has changed, the size of the kids playing the game has changed, I assume rules have changed.
Oh, dramatic changes. The one thing that hasn't changed about the game is that quintessentially part of the attraction of the game is its violent nature. The question of the debate that's raged on from the very beginning till today is how much violence is acceptable. The essence of football, American football, is that Americans like the idea of a outmatched, outgunned, undersized, outskilled team through the application of teamwork and ingenuity, not because they're better players, but because they're better men prevailing in winning the game. That's what appeals to people about football. It appealed to people back in the 19th century, and it still does today. Over those years, the game has had to adapt, both in terms of the times, but also to answer that question, that central debate as to how much violence is acceptable. In the early years of football, there was a tremendous amount of violence, and there were deaths, and deaths were relatively commonplace. Back in the 18th century, there were 20 to 30 deaths per season in football, unacceptable by today's standards. And a lot of the violence that didn't result in death, and there were a lot of violence in the game, was intentional in nature. And this, of course, filtered down to places like Fitchburg and high school team here in Fitchburg. And you know, what I found fascinating about the local football scene is that when there was a response to this violence, the first big response to it being in 1905, 1906, when the forward pass was introduced, not to make the game more exciting, but to make the game safer.
What is a forward pass?
When a ball is thrown beyond the line of scrimmage. Anything that was lateral or behind was okay, you know, in the early rules, under the early rules of football. Anything that went toward the line of scrimmage or beyond the line of scrimmage was forbidden. And until the rule was changed in 1906, such a pass, that forward in nature, would result in the ball being turned over to the other side. It would be a loss of possession. But what I found fascinating in my research is that the Eastern colleges were relatively slow to adapt to this brand new rule, the forward pass, in 1906. But Fitchburg High School was using it in a pronounced way, right off the bat. In fact, there was an article in the Sentinel that said that the boys' fundamental execution in learning the fundamentals of the game was delayed because they were learning this new rule in 1906.
Interesting, interesting. So the little I know about football, that would say before 1906, the quarterback wasn't always the big hero.
No, the quarterback still had a major role, but the quarterback couldn't run with the ball until it was touched by somebody else. Mm-hmm. So the quarterback's role was very limited back in those days.
Okay.
The feature of the game in the 19th century was sort of a very battering, closely compacted game where ball carriers would be pushed, pulled, tugged, torn, sometimes catapulted over the defense, if you can believe that. So the idea was to what they called mass momentum plays. And in the early part of the 1890s, they were allowed to be in motion. In fact, at one point, the whole team could be in motion before the ball was snapped. So try to picture all of these players moving towards a sitting duck defense with the ball carrier stuffed in the back, getting ready to be pushed through that line. It was a tough, tough game.
I bet it was. How has the equipment changed to reflect
Well,
this?
dramatically. When Fitchburg started playing football in the early 1890s, there was virtually no equipment. Young men did wear cleats sometimes if they could afford them. They were literally sometimes their Sunday shoes with cleats screwed into the bottoms of them. They wore quilted pants, sold right here at Ivor Johnson. They would sometimes wear sweaters or heavy sweaters to protect their upper bodies a bit. No helmets. Typically they would grow their hair long, which was to ostensibly protect their heads, but I think if you really read between the lines, that sort of moppish hair look was a way of distinguishing themselves as football players.
Okay.
So it was as much fashion as it was protection. By the time the late 1890s, we get into the late 1890s, they starts to appear this sort of banana-shaped, hard rubber object, which was worn over the nose, was fashioned in place with a strap that went around the head, and there was a bite wing that went into the mouth. And the idea was to protect the nose and the teeth. They say, the old timers that played with this, where I could read accounts, said when you got smacked in the nose wearing that, it felt like all of your teeth were being extracted at the same time. So a lot of the young men didn't bother. But there were young men that started to wear those as protection as early as the latter part of the 1890s. And you can see them, in fact, in the very first photo, or the first photo of the one of the early photos of the Fitchburg High School teams. There's an 1894 team, and you can see some of the young men have those things strapped around their necks. And there was, again, a sort of a fashion statement when they were having their photos taken. They would have that draped down over their chest to show that they were a football player.
Absolutely. Now, has the size of the athletes changed?
Dramatically.
And how has that affected the game?
Well, a large player, and they were obsessed in the 19th century and early 20th century, even into the 1930s, talking about the relative size of teams. When you saw pregame coverage, there was always a mention as to who had the larger line and how much they weighed. In the 19th century, you were talking about young men that weighed 120, 130, 140 pounds. A large player was 160 pounds. Not 200 pounders, certainly not 300 pounders.
No, because when I look at NFL games and they're saying these guys are 3 1/4, it's like, how do they even get out of the way?
There are 250, 260, 70-pound high school players routinely today.
Wow.
And the interesting part of it, especially on the professional level, is some of these guys are fast. Not only are they big, but they can move. So it's changed the game. To the extent that Carson Palmer, the quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals a couple of years ago, in a football preview issue of Sports Illustrated, predicted somebody would die in the NFL eventually based on the size and speed of some of these athletes. That wasn't the case back in the early days of football. Certainly there were people dying, not necessarily as a result of the speed of the athletes, but the lack of equipment and the nature of the game itself.
Wow. We have to start wrapping up.
Okay.
We're almost done. Is there anything else people should be looking at when they watch football that can really identify how the game plays?
The fascinating thing, like I said, about the sport is that it is a team sport. Mm-hmm. And as a team sport, at the end of the day, the success of a football team comes from people sacrificing their individuality for the betterment of the team. And it's wonderful on a high school level to go down to Crocker Field and watch these young men who aren't getting paid and who may never play football after high school to do just that. And it's almost an inverse relationship. It's funny that today we pay and idolize athletes on the professional level. Extraordinary sums of money are involved. But when you get down to it, the kids that play at the high school level, and I think this has been true throughout the history of the sport, they are willing to go out there and put in that extra effort and really sacrifice individuality for the betterment of a team. And it's almost the guys that get paid nothing or the least are willing to do that sometimes more than the guys that are actually professionals.
Wow, that's true of many amateur
sports.
Yeah. Well, let me thank everyone for joining us tonight, and especially you, Mark. I really enjoyed it. Next month, we're going to be exploring open space in Fitchburg. So you can read the Fitchburg Sentinel and Enterprise July 10th and tune in on FATV Monday, July 11th. And for those history fans out there who would like to know more about Fitchburg, please join the Friday Nights in Fitchburg History Club. You can come by on June 17th from 6 to 7:30 at the McKay Campus Building C, entrance C, at 67 Ringe Road, and have a little, I think we're doing 50s trivia this month. It should be fun. And most of all, thank you to all the people who have made this series possible. Can't interest you in playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game?
Don't kill me.
Okay, I think we're ready for the, let's see, credits. Did I get the timing wrong? Are we ready for credits?
There you go.
There we go, okay. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back, and it's root, root, root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Nice.
I spared everybody the kazoo.